Hey folks, we're live here from Eurobike. This is Ray from DC Rainmaker, and I've got Jim Meyer from Quarq. We'll be doing a bit of a Q&A. Here we are in the Eurobike RV parking lot, straight from the DCR RV. Actually, this is not the DCR RV. The RV is over there. But yesterday we learned that we just got baked in the sun in the RV. So we're here in the shade next to this lovely old French couple, and we're going to use their RV, even though they don't know it. So the way it's going to work is we'll do I'll have some kind of questions up front for Jim, but then definitely type your questions down below in the box there. So as you join, we'll see those questions live on the screen there. We can go ahead and answer them. And it can be anything on sports technology, whether it be on Quark's products here, or it could be about Quark as a company, or just sports technology in general. So whether it's things that you kind of want to hear from Jim on in the past, or it could be other areas too.
Yeah, business startups, yep. All of that, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So we're again trying with the lower internet here speed, so hopefully it'll work out. So we don't quite know how you're gonna see it. The Wi-Fi has been really tough here at Eurobike. If the quality isn't great on the live stream here, definitely check out the link down below afterwards for the full uploaded video straight from YouTube. So the whole thing has been recorded locally, so you can definitely watch it there as well. So you're good to go either way. So just keep that in mind. So I want to kind of start off with kind of where Quark came from, and you mentioned I think the other day that it's been 10 years that Quark's been around. Mm-hmm. So how did you get started?
Yeah, well, it really was the story of the triathlete that wanted another power meter, and so one way to start a power meter is quit your job so that you don't have money, and then quit my job. Moved to Australia, was going to kind of race seriously, and my wife at the time was going to do an MBA program, mm-hmm. and I went out to buy a power meter, and the main choices were power tap and SRM, and it really left something to be desired. The power tap was a better price, but the SRM was in the crankset, and I had this set of Head 3 race wheels, and it was like, I kind of wondered what to do for a couple days, and then decided, this is something that I could do, because it really fit my background and interest.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it take before you got to the point of, starting building something until you actually had a unit that could record or display power?
Mm-hmm. So that's actually pretty interesting, because I started off not to build a power meter for my own training. Mm-hmm. When I realized that there was kind of a gap in the market, I dove in to start a company to do this. Okay. And so the first power meter that I was going to build was a proof of concept to make sure that I understood the basic engineering about what was required to make a power meter work. And then once I kind of demonstrated that engineering, then could go and fund the company and actually start up to actually build the power meter. So from the time I had the idea to testing the first prototype and understanding that it was working, took 3 months. It was pretty fast.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But that's the time. It took 3 months to build one part that worked once for one person. It then took 25 more months, so basically 2 years and a month, before we had product that could ship. And so that was May 2006 when I had the first prototype. It was February when I had the idea to start Quark. And then we shipped the first unit on the last day of June in 2008. And we still got the photo of the UPS guy taking those first 2 units out of the Quark building. And now we still have the same UPS guy, but he picks them up by the pallet.
Were those first two units people that you knew, or just kind of unknown?
They weren't. They were unknown people. At the time, we definitely would have done Kickstarter if that was available. But we took pre-orders online so that we had those people to contact. We didn't take the money, but we just had their contact information. And then as soon as it was available, we went through our list from top to bottom and went out and contacted people and started the first units moving.
So you mentioned Kickstarter, and we chatted a little bit back a couple of days ago during the launch of your new DZero power meter, which we'll get to it in a little bit. Talk about Kickstarter in terms of, you mentioned you definitely have used it if you could have then. Where do you see that fitting in for more established companies, though? Like, for example, would Quark ever launch something like Kickstarter, or? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I think if you're starting a company, have an idea, Kickstarter is a really good way maybe to generate some working money to work with. I won't say capital because the Kickstarter backers aren't investing in the company, but if you need some money to work with, the Kickstarter can be a mechanism to do that. But the thing that it's best at is demonstrating to yourself and to the public and to other people that you really have a real idea that people value. In software development, a lot of times you talk about minimum viable product, and you also need to be able to do kind of the 30-second elevator pitch. Mm-hmm. And Kickstarter is a great format. The way you look at a Kickstarter campaign, it forces you to verbalize what you think is important about the product and what you think is important about the problem you're trying to solve. And that's really constructive. And then when people back that, it's a really good demonstration that you're on the right track.
So what do you think is that minimum viable level? Is is it a number of units? Is it a dollar amount? Is it what is kind of?
Yeah. So when we think of MVP or minimum viable product, the question is, what is the minimum set of features that's needed for it to be something that people will buy? Mm-hmm. And so, like a minimum viable on a power meter now, it needs to be amp plus. It probably needs to be Bluetooth at this point, but it certainly needs to be. You need to be able to wash it down with a hose, and you can't have very much calibration with it. 5 years ago, there may have been a little more calibration that people would put up with, but that's minimum viable has moved up at this point. Yep. And certainly, if you're at $2,000, you're not anywhere in power meters today.
Right.
You kind of have to be at $1,000 or so.
Yeah.
And so that line of product features and pricing moves over time. Yeah. And that's what we think of minimum viable. And Kickstarter is good for that for many things, power meters and others.
So, in Kickstarter, you've got one product up there that is technically, I guess, it's a Kickstarter product, correct? Mm-hmm. So, for those that don't know, you guys, somewhat recently, a couple months ago now, I guess, right? Bought a Kickstarter company, effectively.
Right.
Which is sort of unusual to actually have I guess the closest you can get to that, I can think of in the sports technology world, was Garmin bought a company 2 years ago that ended up being the Garmin radar company, right? Yep. So, I can't remember the Backtracker, I think at the time was it named, and but yeah, that actually didn't succeed as a Kickstarter. So in that case, they had no backers. Where now you actually have backers. So you bought not just a company, but you bought a company and a whole bunch of backers to not deal with, but essentially to deal with.
To deal with, yes. And so that's what this is. This is the ShockWiz device. And so for you triathletes out here, you'll have no idea what this is or what you do with it. But basically, it's a suspension tuning device. So you connect it to an air suspension. You go ride around, and then you connect to it with your app. And it'll recommend how to change the air pressure on your suspension fork, and also how to adjust the compression and rebound dials and all that. And so this is a technology that was developed in Western Australia, and the guy that came up with it was really frustrated that he's riding his bike around and he's like, nobody knows how to change all those knobs on their fork, and everyone's set up wrong, and it just made him mad, which is great. That's the seed of inspiration. And he had the understanding of how to go out and build a device and develop the algorithms that could change that. And he went out and did that on his own, and then got Kickstarter backers, and by getting the backers, demonstrated that other people in the world felt that this is an important problem to solve. And that allowed us to come along as SRAM, as Quark and SRAM together, and see, his idea that's really clearly laid out in the Kickstarter format, and also see that other people appreciated his idea and were ready to send money to some random dude in Western Australia with a great idea. Yep. But also in Kickstarter, you have to demonstrate a prototype, and that shows a certain amount of command over the technology that's involved. So there, Kickstarter is a great demonstration for us because, say Eurobike, people come to SRAM with all kinds of wacky ideas, and they're at all kinds of phases of development. And if you come to us with an idea, it's like, that's great. We have thousands of engineers. Yep. We have lots of ideas. Yeah. But here's a hint. If you want to come to SRAM with something, bring a prototype. It's really important. And if you're better yet, bring a prototype and 400 backers, that really demonstrates that not only can you build a prototype, you know how to describe and sell it, and that makes it very attractive.
Cool. So I'm going to follow up on that in a second, but just as for the folks that have joined, definitely go ahead and drop your questions that you have down in the comment section there. So this is a live Q&A. We'll go for, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on, if we got more questions, we'll stay longer. So you've got questions for Jim, whether they're technical questions or business questions about, going from kind of essentially nothing to a small company now to being owned by a really big company in the bike space. Feel free to drop those in here as well. Just we see them as soon as they pop up. So you mentioned talking a little bit about buying a Kickstarter company. Were you out shopping for a Kickstarter company, or were you shopping for technology, or was it just one of those like aha moments?
Well, basically, as SRAM, we're always shopping for technology. We do that every day in product development, but then also we really do have an endless stream of companies, inventors, things. All roads kind of lead to SRAM, as we say. And so we come in contact with lots and lots of stuff. And so certainly, suspension and electronics and measurement is an area that we've had an interest in for a while. So when those things come along, that's attractive to investigate and see what's there. And so it was, we took the meeting for sure. And then, with ShockWiz, it was just a good fit with somebody that not only had a good idea, but then had demonstrated it well.
Okay. And is that something that, how did you decide to go, whether, you said kind of shopping as SRAM as a whole versus Quark actually being the entity that picked that up? Is there...
Yeah, well, that's a separate decision that we come at later, where we decide, SRAM has 3,000 people and 15 or 18 locations. So we've got a lot of product teams doing a lot of things. And so with any product, we're always wondering, like, okay, which part of the organization is going to be best at this? And for this product, it turned out to be Quark.
Cool. So hopefully the video live stream is working fairly well. I think it's, for the most part, we only have one person say the sound is having issues. If the sound keeps on having issues, let us know and we'll tweak something up. But so far it's, and as I say this, another person saying something we can do on our end. Fortunately, there's not a lot we can do from our side other than just not much, to be honest. So the good news, though, is that everything is recorded, and so if folks are having problems, then you can definitely watch that recorded link down below afterwards. So it's recorded in full HD, and so you can do that later on if there's issues. But feel free to drop those questions down below as well, and that way we can see them, and even if you can't hear the responses, you'll go ahead and get answers to them eventually. Charles Manson just asked, or Macron just asked right now, how does SRAM make capital allocations based on, and I just lost the rest of the question.
Yeah, based across subdivisions.
Yep.
And all I can do is smile and giggle and say, if you figure that out, that'd be a fantastic thing to come tell me about. No, yeah, it's an ongoing, like any company, it's quite an adventure on an ongoing basis, and so there's no one rule. It's just following the technology and following what's strategic and all that. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question that came in from Nathan Pearson, who I believe is the same Nathan Pearson behind Trainer Road, is feature request. Have the Quark power on light blink 3 times on first start if you have low battery. Maybe you can talk a little bit, it's actually a good segue into obviously DZero,
right.
And some of the changes that you guys have made there. On the technology front. Yeah,
so we'll just start into that LED discussion right now. One of the things, this is a new DZero power meter. We've got a new red-green LED. It's super fancy, 2 colors in 1 LED, out of control. We did that to match the ETAP electronic drivetrain. It's a great request. One of the things that we look at when we're thinking about that is we never want the LED to be a decoder ring, where it's like, okay, I got 3 blinks. What does that mean? Yep. And you have to go to some manual or whatever to know what that means. And then, of course, with red-green, it's great to have 2 colors. Anyone watch the Red-Green show? Do you know that?
Nah, it's may predate.
I don't know. Anyway, red-green fans out there, there's your shout-out. Anyway, the other thing is that a lot of people are colorblind and can't tell the difference between red and green anyway. So usually we try to encode long flash or short flash in addition to the red and green. But on top of that, this is all the reasons why this is hard. Your 2032 coin cell, like you have in a Quark power meter or in almost any other device on your bike, if you look at the voltage coming out of that, the voltage is more dependent on temperature than it is on state of charge of the battery. So if you read in voltage and try to say the battery's dead or its battery is okay, you actually don't know that. You're really saying the battery is warm, or the battery is cold, and that's actually the challenge. And so we've always been working around that. We do have a couple more tricks that maybe in some future firmware revisions of the new DZero will actually allow us to give a little bit more meaningful of an output there. But that's usually the problem, is that when the battery dies, it got cold relative to your last ride.
So that's a good segue into, for those that don't know, Quarq did release a whole crap ton of new power meters this past week at Eurobike. My post went up finally a couple hours ago. Again, my Wi-Fi has totally destroyed any hopes of getting posts up this week. I've got 25 gigs of posts that are backlog trying to get up, and it's telling me 7 days until those complete. So, but Quarq's post did just post 2 hours ago, so go ahead and check that out. One of the things I talked about in there is kind of the change that you guys have on the battery life expectations. So you used to say, I think it was 300 hours, and now you're saying 200. Maybe you can talk a little bit. Is that because of Bluetooth? Is that what's that difference there? From?
So we've reduced that battery life expectation from 300 to 200. A little bit of that is Bluetooth because it's doing a dual broadcast of Bluetooth Low Energy and ANT Plus. And so you take a little bit of an energy hit there to do those two broadcasts, but also the 300-hour mark is kind of it's a bit optimistic, and you'd get 300 hours if it's warm, but typically what would happen is you'd roll around to fall or on your first cold day, guess what? It doesn't actually have enough state of charge, and the voltage drops, and then it's not working. And so, 200 hours is kind of a safer number to go with.
Sure, that makes sense. Sorry, we're both watching as a guy randomly walks basically almost into our RV here, and it was a bit of an odd, like, what's he about to do?
It is quite a state of technology. I was noticing, we can live broadcast with just the two of us, and there's not a grip or a stagehand here to shoo everyone else away. So.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, the whole setup, in case folks are wondering how this is working. There's a system called Mevo, M-E-V-O. It's a camera. I did a YouTube unboxing on it. I didn't actually write like a post or anything on it, but it's something I bought. It was technically, I guess it wasn't technically a crowdfunding project. The project came out at CES this past year. You could pre-order ahead of time, so it's like that gray area between a company doing true pre-orders and crowdfunding. And anyways, it's a full 4K camera in there, but then it basically crops a different part of it. So I can go ahead and tap on Jim's face there, and it zooms into him. I can tap on me, and it zooms into me, and so on. And it works really well in certain scenarios, and that would be a scenario where you have connectivity. And so here it's a bit rough with the connectivity. That's why this live stream may be cutting out in and out, but it seems to be not too bad overall, which is good. These mics are a little clearer. So going back to questions here, Longtran asks, what does DZero stand for?
Yeah, so DZero is actually a particle detector and physics experiment at Fermilab in Illinois. And so we've had a history of, Quark is named after quarks. I've always, if I had a musical talent, I'd have a band called Quark, but I don't have talent, so hence we got Elsa and Riken are both named after particle accelerators in Germany and Japan, and so DZero is named after the particle detector DZero and the DZero project in Fermilab.
And your favorite TV show?
That's a good question. Actually,
didn't know if like Best Bang Theory was coming straight in there.
Yeah. Big Bang Theory is definitely on the list.
Jonathan Lee asked, and I think it's Jonathan, what advantage how spider-based design versus a crank arm design? Love how you're
when you're the spider's its only job is to apply to transmit torque from the crank arm out to the chain rings, and so it's a very clean torque or load path through that part of the bike. When you look at a crank arm, you actually, when you say you've got two crank arms and you're standing on them, the crank arms see load all the time when you have weight on the bike. And then you'd have to subtract the load on both crank arms and then integrate over when you're moving. Whereas in the Spider, when you stop pedaling and you're standing or jumping off a jump or jumping up and down on the bike, the Spider has no load applied to it. and it's just the chain load. And so that lets you do things like backpedal zero very nicely, and it's a really clean way to measure power, and that's why we've stayed with that.
What changes are in here from you mentioned, I think, there's a couple of new additions you had on the accuracy pieces that may impact that from the strain gauges. How is this different from someone that may have just bought a Riken a year ago, or Riken AL?
Yeah, well, a couple changes. One, we've done a lot of work around OmniCal, which allows you, I'll let the car go by.
Yep.
So that allows you to change chain rings without affecting the slope. Now, it turns out that Riken AL is a heavier power meter, and so that was actually really good with OmniCal anyway. But now you've got a lighter power meter that's just as good as Riken. But then we've also changed the strain measurement circuit inside to be lower noise and higher accuracy. And we introduced what we call the 10K temperature compensation a few years ago. Now we still retain the 10K temperature compensation, but we don't have to apply as much compensation because we've been able to address some of those thermal drift issues in the physics of the strain gauge layout and the board layout without having to rely on software correction. So again, we're trying to make sure that not that the accuracy is better in the best conditions, we're trying to make sure that the accuracy is always good, including the worst conditions.
Okay. So talk a little about claimed accuracy. So this is something that I think everyone in the industry talks about a lot, and everyone says I'm plus or minus 2% or plus or minus X amount, usually 2%, and they just kind of throw that out there. Where do you think you guys are versus what you can claim, if that makes a sense? Like, I think a lot of times when I walk around the floor here, I talk and people are like, well, we know that we're plus or minus 0.5% or 1% in 99% of situations, except the other part that we're beyond that.
Yeah, and I think hopefully we aren't too disappointed in the answer here. We're really kind of dissatisfied with the way we talk about percentage accuracy in the power meter world. For a long time it was 2%, 1.5%, and what does that mean? Is that percentage of full scale accuracy? Is that what is that? And it's really not well defined by us, by anyone else. And so I remember this asked on a forum once, like, what does that mean? And somebody replied, it may have been Robert Chung. It's like, basically, if you're complaining about an error, then that's less than 1.5% of something that you're complaining about, don't bother calling customer service. That's kind of a practical answer. But I think, and then, we'll gonna make the call now, and we're gonna take this upon ourselves. We're at the stage of power meter development where we need better benchmarks to benchmark power meter accuracy. It's really, a lot of them are 1.5% and very good. And I would say that, in whatever 90-odd% of riding conditions, we are within 1.5% of your real number. So I feel good about that. But is it a scientifically rigorous claim? No, it's not. And I think that's a problem because everyone would benefit from a better number there.
Okay. So folks, keep on dropping your questions down below there. We'll get to them as soon as they come in. So one of the things that, you mentioned kind of having that benchmark standard, is that something that you'd be open to publishing? Like at a point of saying, here is where you want to test power meters and how we test power meters, and we encourage others to do that.
Right, yeah, I think the only way that benchmark is really meaningful is if other people can reproduce it. It's kind of the scientific method. And so I think we need to define, here are the tests, and this is what you need to do, and this is your test setup, and this is the way you should report the results. And if you have some sort of publication or an independent test house or a university or Johnny in his basement, they should be able, with the right equipment, should be able to reproduce that test.
So do you see those sort of tests as being, because you mentioned kind of the right equipment, I think that's one of the challenges that both the industry and publishers and journalists and media and even just Johnny in the basement have in terms of how do they determine a power meter is accurate, right? So, if I ask any power meter company, they say, well, we've tested on all these cool machines and you guys have all those same cool machines, right? And it's perfect. And then you walk outside and everything kind of crumbles. Not in your case, but in general, right? And you get through the reality of cobbles and rain and snow and all that stuff. Do you almost foresee having kind of like a dual book of tests, like something that here's what you should be able to accomplish indoors, and then here's what you should be able to accomplish outdoors, or in some sort of test scenario?
Yeah, I think so. And, I think the perfect is the enemy of the good here.
Yep.
And so, having something practical, I know for our power meters, you always have the zero offset number that we read out, and that reads out in 30 seconds of a Newton meter. And it turns out, we do a lot of dynamic tests and have a lot of expensive machines at Quarq. But at the end of the day, we can do a lot of stuff with just a simple zero offset. And if you measure that zero offset in this position, that position, at this temperature, at that temperature, with some careful application of the weights on the pedals and thinking about what you're doing, you can really evaluate a lot about a power meter. Of course, one of the things that you run into is that some power meters don't report a raw torque number.
Right.
And that can be problematic to allow somebody in the field in order to evaluate its performance.
Yep.
But we feel that's important. That's what makes it a valuable tool to you, is that you can have it in the field and you can hang weights from the pedals and can see that it's working.
Do you see, so I think, we've talked in the past at times about having, you mentioned the zero offset, for example, is a great way to kind of track what's going on, both from a test standpoint, but also from is there something wrong with that unit standpoint, right? And that's, one of the core numbers that you get back as a user from your power meter. Do you think we'll get to the point where some of the big companies like Garmin and others will allow you to start recording that data in the fit files?
I hope so. I think that would be useful, and especially the power users would enjoy having that in there. And of course it's power meters are widely used enough that some people will that's too much information. They don't want to digest that. But yeah, like if you spent a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds, close to $1,000 on a power meter, you deserve to know what it's doing, and that would be useful.
It's interesting because if you look at stages to head unit, as well as kind of a whole software cloud platform behind it. And that platform is built on a platform called Today's Plan, which is an Australian company. And one of the things they've done for a while now is tracking zero offset for head units that report it, and not everyone does. Don't, unfortunately. And they were kind of talking about the idea of being able to say from a manufacturer level that, hey, they're tracking this offset, and when something goes really askew, to almost be proactive to the customer and say, by the way, we just saw that your zero offset went off the deep end. Maybe something's wrong with that unit. And that'd be cool, at least in my opinion. And the same thing for coaches. Like I talk to my coach all the time, and he has some athletes that are very technically minded, and then some athletes that maybe not so much.
And you do a great set of intervals and throw out some great numbers, and it's like, was that zeroed? Was that good? Do we believe that? It'd be nice to know.
Absolutely. So Luis, I believe it's Luis, asked, can you use a spider on other cranks like rotor?
Okay, so all the new power meters are the DZero platform, and they all have this new 8-bolt interface that's designed. It's an interface that we've used to specifically for power meters, and it's designed to reduce the zero offset changes we were just talking about. So all of our new products are all the 8-bolt specific. So we've got a hollow carbon arm option and a solid aluminum option. And those are the crank compatibility, both road and mountain. So we don't support the rotor cranksets. However, the Quarq unit, you will support rotor rings. So if you've got rotor rings or some other form of chain ring, then those are compatible on the chainring side, and then you can choose an aluminum or a carbon arm.
Would they also support the rotor Q rings or oval rings?
Yeah, we can certainly install Q rings or oval rings. We currently don't do a separate compensation for those, so there's a separate kind of an inflation factor that happens there. And the new DZero power meter hasn't addressed that specifically.
Okay. Is that something you guys will look at doing down the road? Or?
Yeah, we're looking at that. Okay. And of course, one of the big things, we can hack something in there and say, oh, it's great.
Yeah.
And then, actually that's one of those testing things. Say we put that in there and claimed it, who could figure that out if it's working or not? And of course, for us, we need to know that it's working before we ship something like that. And so that's what we're working on. But that's one of the things on the list.
Okay. For those that aren't familiar, kind of oval rings or Q rings or elliptical chain rings, basically anything that's non-rounded, the oval shaped, I guess, and they cause problems with lots of power meters, and it's been lots of talk over time with different pro riders using them and claiming higher power, and even Froome, for example, kind of uses it as a way to talk about how those power numbers might not be what they actually are. It's really strange. But anyways, if you're looking for information about that, I can't remember if it's Tom Renault or Dan Connolly wrote a whole blog post on it. Just search into Google power meter oval rings funky. And use the word funky, and you'll find this post. I think it's called "What's Up with My Funky Rings," and it explains in detail on there and why it matters and what happens if you have those rings and what the differences are. So a question here from Richard Evans. What improvement is there in the new power meters compared to the ELSA RS? How is it better?
Yeah, so over the ELSA RS, we still have another, the ELSA RS is the Shimano compatible version, and we do have a replacement for that. It's called the Quark D4 instead of DZero, and that'll be compatible with 11-speed Shimano rings. From the LRS to the D4, you get now Bluetooth compatibility, and it's also compatible with BB386. So if you've got a BH bike or one of the bikes with the BB386 Evo crankset or bottom bracket, it's now compatible there. And then of course we've got the red-green LED and the improved strain circuit and all that.
Okay. Chris Haskell asked, what is the planned obsolescence of a Quark? A buddy put 20K miles on his. How long do you expect them to live?
That's a great question. There's nothing in it that inherently wears out. You know, all of the Quark power meters, we do fatigue tests on the fatigue test machine. So it's tested to last the life of a crankset. So you think about you know, an aluminum crank and how long that needs to last. It could be out in the field for 20 years and do thousands and thousands of cycles. The strain gauge electronics are designed to last as long as the material function of the rest of the crankset. So as long as you keep putting batteries in it, and the water stays out of it, it should just keep going and going.
Okay. So speaking of aluminum, Carl Donaldson asked, steel or aluminum chainring bolts and why?
Yeah, so we recommend steel bolts, mainly because with steel bolts, you can tighten them up to 10 Newton meters, and that gives you a nice tight interface between the chainring and the spider, and that reduces that, again, that zero offset drift. It keeps the chainring and spider stationary relative to each other. So there are some aluminum bolts that are okay for 10 Newton meters, but not all of them, and so that's our recommendation of steel. You know, if you have aluminum bolts that you know can go to 10 Newton meters of torque, that's great. Put them on, torque them down, super. But for the most part, steel is a safer way to go there.
Okay. So if you look back over the last 10 years of your power meter development history, what would you say is the biggest change that you made to increase accuracy? Like what was there, or decrease edge scenarios, things that basically caused problems? What was kind of that one, the big thing that sticks in your head?
Oh boy. You know, this is the problem, is that there is no big thing. It's the, you know, we talk about it with the engineers, and they've got one of the engineers that we worked with from the beginning, Mark Rages, you've met him. He's a real nerd, and there's many times when I've come into the workshop late at night and talked with Mark, and you sit down and it's like, this is the gift that keeps on giving. You know, like you can just find and like nibble away at this, nibble away at that. And it's just all, you know, it is the marginal gains all over the place, and you just keep, you know, cleaning things up, and that's actually the hard part about these, you know, the guys starting out with, and guys and gals starting out with the new power meter companies, is that there's just this huge learning curve. And it keeps going, you know, and so, you know, I know that we've changed things from the bolt patterns to this center interface, to the strain gauge design, to board layout changes, to firmware changes, all of those things, and they all kind of contribute to getting better accuracy over all conditions.
I know I've used your example a few times that you've kind of said in the past of, you know, there's things that you got to building 100 power meters and you're like, wow, that's great, and then you got to 1,000 power meters and you're like, I didn't know jack when I was at 100 power meters.
Right.
And then
and the same thing at 10,000.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, again, you know, you build 100. I think that first year Quark, you know, numbers are hard to come by, but I think in 2008 we sold 300 units. Well, you know, there can be a lot of sins in there, and in 300 units, they don't all get uncovered.
Sure.
But when you ship 3,000 units, you find out a lot of things. You know, 10 times more. Go figure. So
that's cool. Let's see. I just had a couple questions pop in here, and then we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the race intelligence over there. That's pretty cool stuff as well. So again, folks, if you have questions, drop them down in the comment section there. They screen. It does take a couple seconds to show up, but we'll definitely go through all those questions. Let's see. Jeremy Sparford asked, does Canada or Specialized Spider that is still supported have any of the new DZero technology?
Not currently. So the unit that we make for Specialized in Canada, and the Specialized is branded for Specialized, that remains the same. So all the units that are available at your bike shop, that's the most up-to-date thing we've got.
Okay. So, one of the things that you did announce this past week, well, you kind of announced it a week ago and it's sort of hinted at over the summer with different manufacturers, is in that new Prime program, or the Quark Prime Power Ready, I think I got that right. And the idea that a bike manufacturer, I think who are the ones that you have on board?
Yeah, Canyon, Felt, Trek, and Fuji.
Okay. They have, basically these cranksets that are ready to go for you to install a Quark Spider down the road. Do you see that as a sort of an interim step between the point of just simply having those same manufacturers installing power meters directly on them, or? I mean, obviously some of those do at the very high end, but
right. So yeah, I think that can go a lot of ways. So Quark Prime is a Quark branded crankset. Looks like this, but it doesn't have a power meter. It's got just a bare aluminum spider, and it says Quark Q Power Ready over here. And what you do is then, if you buy a bike that's Quark Prime equipped, you can buy a separate power meter, and then pull the crank off and undo these little 8 bolts. And when you buy a separate power meter, you get this fancy tool, and you can pop the new power meter on. And that's a nice setup, because a lot of people want power on their bikes, but not everyone. And so the bike shop can have a bunch of bikes on the shop floor, all Quark Prime equipped, and a few Quark power meters in the display case, and then can install them as needed very rapidly. So it's unknown whether we'll end up with power meters always, or if there's always going to be just a clear way to install a power meter. And the examples there are, one, on pedals. You buy a low-end bike, you get pedals, and above a certain price point, there's no pedals on it. You just install your own pedals. And it may be that power meters go like that, and you just install your own pedals. Or, it could be that power meters become just expected equipment on any bike you buy. And we'll find out. I think it'll take another 5 years for that to play out.
Okay. One of the things I asked Chip yesterday is, we talk a lot about, like, for folks like you, or anyone who's starting a small technology company, there's always ideas behind your head. You're like I talked to various people today, and they're like, I got this idea for the next project. I'm like, oh, you just started your first one. Don't get distracted yet. What, in Chip's case, it was the kicker desk, which is a desk that, he rides, puts in front of the bike on his trainer, and you can put a laptop on it. And it sat in the closet for years, kind of like slowly making its way. Now it's actually a product they've sold. What are things, like, in your world that are in the closet that your bosses, so to speak, at SRAM have said, Jim, keep that in the closet. That's not a product you're going to make or sell anytime soon.
Boy, wouldn't that be a great list to spew out loud on the internet, right? There's definitely a list. There's some of them we're actually starting to do and to sneak out. I think the game always is to figure out, what you can do well, and really execute on that. But also there's an element of inspiration that you need, because what'll happen is, and this is, get into some of the business theory and all that, is that once you start a project, you kind of become a prisoner of your own project, because you think about who's the customer you're trying to serve, who's the market, what feature do they need, and if you're designing buggy whips, and you're what's the next buggy whip, you're not in a position to anticipate the internal combustion engine and automobiles replacing horse and buggy.
Sure.
And that's where that inspiration side is always a balance to bounce back and forth between. So,
do you have projects I would say, that are not at all bicycle focused? So it's actually funny. After the show ended yesterday, we were chatting about Chip's closet, essentially, and 2 things came out of that I never knew. One is that, I knew that he obviously had the dock boat company behind it, right? But one of those projects that he wants to do is to build basically a floating barge that you can put a car on, and then and it's really complex, but this is one of those
Yeah.
projects there. And the second thing is he's making an electric car that goes like from 0 to 90 in 1.6 seconds or something like that. Again,
Okay.
like a random sort of thing. Are there anything like that that has nothing to do with bike technology, that just is the geek in you that you're like, this was an awesome thing, but it's not at all sellable
Yeah,
that you've made?
it's funny. I'm sure there's something in there. It's not
Yeah.
coming to mind.
Okay.
The only thing that's actually coming to mind isn't something that I want to build,
Yep.
but just a pure rant.
Yep.
Have you used one of these new Coke machines, the new fancy silver things?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're terrible. Like it's like, for one, the ice is like behind the Coke feed, so
Yep.
you're filling your ice and it's dripping Coke on your hand, and they all do it. And I don't know how they miss that.
Yep.
And then the touch screen is slow. And I went to one day and I could have Coke with vanilla, Coke with orange, Coke with lime, Coke with lemon, whatever, and I couldn't get Coke because it was out of Coke. And so those are things that are on my mind. Otherwise, everything else that I dream about is kind of all in the bike world.
Yep.
And so I should probably not talk about those.
Coke.
But if I have an idea, I'll
We
let you
forgot
know.
the beer. It's in the,
Yeah.
RV. I know I
Yes.
forgot something. I'm setting up the last second here. It's funny you mentioned that Coke machine, because I actually, through someone, know who made those Coke machines.
Oh, I'd love to sit down and
So
talk with them.
I, like, a friend of a friend did that, and basically, yeah, the whole thing. And he did, like, he was in charge of mostly the software aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, like, the same sort of thing, like, have you seen this machine before? And it's funny because now, I mean, no such thing like that exists in France, right? And so
Right.
I completely forget about it until I
Yeah.
go back to the US and I go to things like Firehouse Subs has them, is the only
Right.
thing I can think of. And so, yeah, it's one of those funny things of, like, that's really cool, but not, like, for the exact reasons you mentioned, little, like, quirks.
Yeah, yeah, and like, did you measure the flow rate of people through this thing?
Yeah.
You can't get ice. Like, I want ice, and I'm going to use the iced tea over there, and I can't because somebody's digging through the menu.
Yeah, and it's never very fast either. There's always a huge line.
Yes, it's always a huge
it's
line.
Indecision
Big
problems.
bottleneck.
So Jason Shearer asks, any quality durability improvements with DZero on the mountain bike cranksets?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around on the mountain bike side, and so we've every time we do a new product, we get to look back on all the experience of the old product, and that kind of informs what sort of testing regimen we need to do. And so on the last product, it's done quite well. We have seen some water things on occasion, and that made our water testing better, which then allows the next generation of the product to be better. So we're very much think about things at a process system level, where we need to learn from our experience that builds better testing, that let's make sure that the next product comes out better, and we've applied all that for the next version.
Perry asks, any word on track compatible? That's what.
Oh, that's a good one. It's funny. We've got you're the second request for a track power meter today. The best that I've seen out there is that you've got the adapter from 110 to 144 that some people have made, and those work quite well from an accuracy power meter standpoint. So you're welcome to use those. And then of course we have the carbon and aluminum cranks for track. But currently there's no track specific Quark.
Okay. So one of the things that came up in the presentation on Monday, so there was just kind of background for folks, there's basically a SRAM media presentations on Monday and Tuesday. We got to go out ride all the stuff, both the new Quark stuff as well as stuff from Zip and the new ETAP equipped road disc brakes and all sorts of, basically all the new jazz. And it came in the presentation kind of talking about how both Zip as well as it sounded like the road disc team we're using kind of like a special edition Quark to capture data from braking sensors as well as aerodynamic sensors.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit kind of what that is or how that works, or.
Yeah. Well, it's a tool that we made for the brake team, and you can kind of imagine the Quark power meter here. It measures torque, and instead of putting a chainring out here, we can put a disc brake, and then you're riding around with disc brakes with power meters in it. And the brake team uses those on their development. So it's kind of a cool product, and yeah.
And do they then stream it to the Quark in the center, or do they like individually?
That'd be each brake would go out to a central location where they can record it. One of the things we've got for that is the collector, which is a recording device. But then that lets the engineers get that data and go compare it. So.
Okay.
This would be one of those side projects, actually.
Yeah.
Now that you bring it up, should we sell power meter brake rotors? You could buy a brake rotor. It'd be $700 for each brake rotor. Like, That's one of those projects that sits in the closet right now. But if write your congressman, and, if we or write Quark, and if we get enough fan mail that says I want power measuring brake rotors and here's my $700, then that might get put on the list.
And in that case, that's measuring more your braking force than it is any sort of power. So it's almost the inverse power relationship.
Right. So it'd be where you're scrubbing power, which would be kind of interesting on some courses. On some Ironman courses, the amount of power you use on the brakes is like almost nothing.
Right.
I've always kind of joked like, there's some Ironman courses I'm pretty sure you could Fred Flintstone the whole course and have no brakes on the bike at all and just put your foot down when you need to slow down.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was talking literally with someone 3 hours ago about this exact same thing, and there was actually a study done, and so that's why I'll talk about it since they contemplated something in this area, but that exact sort of thing. There's a study done basically about taking a trained road cyclist that's of higher aerobic training, and having them compete against a not so great mountain biker, but was better in terms of handling skills. And then they did kind of sensors to see, that better trained road bike guy lost because of how much braking he was doing. And to be able to almost measure that and start to see, is there a number you can make out of that? And not that you want people to be afraid of braking in all scenarios, but there's a way to train your brain to advance.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the mountain biking is the key there. I've since moved from triathlon to mountain biking, and so all the competition I do is basically mountain bike stuff, and that leads to learning just so not without power measurement rotors. Power on mountain bike is really interesting to look at, and just a little short story here. I took some of the segments that I was targeting, and you go through and you ride through as fast as you can, and if you're coming from the roadside, you always kind of a lot of times are thinking about how do I maximize my power. So you start into this mountain bike section, maybe it's 30 minutes, you're targeting say it's 310 watts or whatever, you hit lap, and you just crank on it, and you're trying to keep that average power number, and you see it drop, and you're like, and it's, and I remember going through there and coming up short, like relative to my friend, it's like, I'm not as fast. It's like, how does that work? And I'm like, I need to do something different. And so you change your pacing strategy within that mountain bike course, and I was able to get a faster time, but the average power is lower. And it's super interesting, and it's even the normalized power can be lower. So, for those of you that are into that, because it's really important to carry speed through corners. And if you're going to be slow a little bit, sometimes you don't want to pedal because the next thing you're going to do is grab the brakes, and you don't want to do that. You want to pedal when you can use that speed for more distance. But if you're going to slam and sprint for a moment and peg the brakes the next second, you're just throwing that effort away.
So almost like an efficiency metric can come out of that in terms of
some sort.
It's really interesting to see. I think we get to the point where we have head units that people can do some sort of apps on that or start to develop that, right? Where in the past we've been kind of locked into what the manufacturer wanted. To get to the point to be able to say, let's put apps on these head units, whether it be from Garmin or Element or from Wahoo or someone else, and kind of start to dive into those things where you've got to put a sensor on that, and somebody can do it at home and start to go from there. Let's see. Jason Shearer says, thank you. I've had a few XX1 Spiders replaced under warranty. Awesome service, by the way. And I think it has a lot to do with the living and racing in wet areas of the Southeast. So he was talking about the mountain bike improvements. David Dixon, I'd be interested in renting a rotor-based power meter for brakes. Perhaps it could mount up to existing rotors by placing the inner spider, so you don't have to come up with replace it on every rotor replacement. So definitely, I think there may be some interest there. I think you have your next Kickstarter project.
Sounds good. And that's a great example. Hopping back to the Kickstarter topic, that's one that as Quark, that might be an interesting thing for us to think about kickstarting, doing a Kickstarter around. It's like, here's this mountain bike brake thing. Who wants this? How do we measure that? And of course, the thing that I think about most is that we don't need your money to do that. And that's the thing about Kickstarter we started to talk about the other day. When you back something on Kickstarter, you got to read those words carefully. It's like very specifically chosen. You are a backer, and you're making a pledge. You are not purchasing something. You're not a customer, and you're not an investor. You pledged money. You gave your money away, and you're hoping that you get a reward, because everything is listed as a reward in return for giving money. And so that's useful as a system when you're starting something like ShockWiz or all. But as Quark, and SRAM, where we have capital, we don't need people's money, and we don't want to have that liability of you shouldn't be pledging. Don't give us money. Buy something, but we don't need you to give us anything. But the Kickstarter platform is a great way to promote and to gauge interest in something, and so that's something we may consider.
What do you think is the right approach? So a lot of people talk about the challenge with Kickstarter right now is that companies can not swindle folks, but to some degree swindle. And I think obviously Kickstarter as a company, as opposed to crowdfunding in general, has put in a lot of new limitations over the last year. But in a lot of ways, they still get their chunk, and they kind of wash their hands of the whole mess. What do you think, just from more of a general sense, is potentially the right approach to solve some of those problems?
I don't know. I think that I'm glad to see companies like Kickstarter out there doing this. And certainly we don't have the right formula now, but if you want to swindle everyone, Kickstarter or one of these crowdfunding platforms would be a pretty good way to do it, because by the time you've raised your money, people have pledged your money to you, and you can oh, sorry, that didn't work, and wander off, and there's no accountability there. And so I think when as me, and I've started to back Kickstarter projects and with some interest and enthusiasm, and really I'm deciding, one, do I like this anyway enough to just give my money away, crossing my fingers that I get something back, or have they demonstrated in some way that I really believe that they can, not only are serious about it, but they can actually execute on it. And so one of the examples of that is Silka. Because I know the Silka people, and they've got their T-ratchet system, and I trust them. I know who they are, and I understand it's Kickstarter. I understand that I've pledged them money and that I haven't purchased something, but I do think there's a really good chance that we're going to get something from Silka. But if it's some Joe Schmo that I've never heard of before, don't know.
Tough to know.
And especially if it's a laser-powered shaver or a laser-powered razor that looks bogus. You ain't gonna get my money. So.
I totally agree. I think there's lots of potential as well, just for, I think, also media, mainstream and otherwise, to sort of dig into claims a bit more and say that's not realistic. That's simply, if someone is trying to do something that, they're trying to do 10 somethings in one product that not one of those have been done by another company anywhere in the industry, you go, maybe? No, probably not.
There's a great story. Remember back, they had the one laptop per child laptop thing? And who's that? John Negroponte? Was that him?
I know who you're talking
remember.
About.
But they went to, I think the company was Quanta, right? That makes all the laptops for everyone. And there was a great interview with Quanta, and they said, we have a rule. It's called one miracle per project. And the one laptop per child guys came in, and they wanted 11 miracles. And that's kind of what you see on some of these Kickstarters is ooh, there's a couple miracles that need to happen, and we double check ourselves, we want one miracle per project or 0 miracles. We're just going to go do that, and we know what we're doing.
No, exactly. Let's see. Matthew Hartso asked, just bought a bike with a SRAM Force CX1 and was looking for power meters. Now I think I'm stuck with power to max your power meter, since the DZero has 8 volts versus 3. What gives?
So there's always a lot of timing involved with OE purchase cycles and some of the decisions of the specifications that are on different bikes. So you run the Force, which doesn't have the 8-volt pattern. But what you can do is you can get a power meter with an arm. So you can either get the aluminum or carbon arm, and that'll go right into the bottom bracket that's on your bike. You can move the chainring over, and then you've got a crank arm that you can sell elsewhere. So hopefully in the future that will be compatible, and that's something we'll look for.
Okay. Yancey Arrington asks, will we see faster sampling rates from the DZero, such as quarter second? Would there be any benefit for the increased sampling rate?
So here's another open secret of power meters, is that all Quark power meters from the beginning always they transmit data on the quarter second, and you get new data for every single pedal rev. unfortunately, the recording devices out there available today, almost all of them downsample to 1 second. So if you're sprinting at 120 RPM, from June 2008, we have always outputted data at the 120 RPM rate, or outputted new data. You always get an average torque and a time for every single pedal rev. Unfortunately, the receiving end is limited and doesn't record that. And so maybe this was time to talk about this. This is what we call collector. And I think if you go into Google, or excuse me, into YouTube, and you Google collector with a Q, you will find me in a hotel room in Las Vegas in, like, I think it's like around 2009, talking about collector. And at that time it was a different device, but we've always had this disappointment that no one else is recording data at that high data rate. So collector is a data recording black box. It's got a one button on and off. You turn it on and then it records every message that comes out of your power meter or any other AMP Plus device. Now collector includes GPS and which can record at 1 hertz or up to and it includes a cell modem. So it can transmit that data over cell networks using AT&T and their international roaming partners.
And what are you using that for today? So that's, I mean, that obviously race competitions, stuff like that primarily, or?
Yeah, so the project, the collector project came from our desire to have better data recording as a product development tool. That was always the background, is that we wanted better on-the-bike recording devices. But for the last, about a year and a half, we've been using collector at Ironman races and other triathlons and some mountain bike races, as well as the Enduro World Series, and using it to track athletes in a race in real time, and then to pull all that data back to have a live map of their location, as well as pulling in biometric information of like power and heart rate.
Okay. What's the maximum number of folks that you've had in a race using this at once?
So I think one of the best examples is the Norseman Triathlon just earlier this month. Well, we're in September now, last month on early August, and we had 250 athletes at the Norseman competing, and every one of them was equipped with the collector. And that's really critical, particularly in an event like Norseman, because there's no aid stations, and so every athlete had to supply their own. We got more wanderers through the studio here. Yeah. Every athlete had to supply their own support crew, and so not only did collector provide a way to view the race all around the world, because it's a small event and there's no cameras, but it also allowed the support people at the event to support their athletes. And it rained all day, and so it was very helpful to know where your athlete was on the course.
And what data? So today it's power, heart rate, cadence type data.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an example where you could, for example, do temperature down the road or something else potentially into that?
Yeah, and we'd like to look forward to support that where we've got other data, and say you're a Fred in the Shed or a Kickstarter person. Yep. Here you go. If you want to start a Kickstarter project and you've got some wild measurement that you want to make, but it's more scope in the project to add the recording side of that, give us a call and we'll figure out how to get collector to record your wild contraption of whatever you want to measure, and we'll suck that data in and deliver it back to you with geotagged and all that stuff. Yeah.
So what do you see the future of collector?
Yeah, well, we imagine that races, they get better when you know where everyone's at, and there's so many events where everyone gets together and you say go, and everyone disappears over the sunset, then it's a great system to keep track of where everyone is. And then we also think that at some point there may be individual applications on your daily riding to record your ride and to also let people know where you're at.
Okay. Justin Kong asks, will you be dropping the prices of the older generation Quarks or discounting them until they sell out?
So we've been planning this transition for a while. That's one thing that SRAM gets to be pretty good at is transitioning from one to the other. So we'll cross our fingers
Yeah.
internally. Hopefully, we're out of the old ones already, and all you can get is a new one. So you may find some of the old version in stock at your bike shop, or maybe we'll end up with a few, and there may be some discounts on those, perhaps.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we've planned this transition, so you should see the stock already starting to rotate. And if you've been paying really close attention in the last few weeks, it may have been actually a little hard to get your hands on a Quark. Because that stock has been rotating out.
Yep.
So.
Because your ship day is virtually like 2 weeks away officially.
Yeah.
Or something
Like we're
that.
building now,
Yeah.
so this is all switching over now.
Okay. Jason Shearer asks, interested in the collector device, is it going to be generally available? I would like a dumb device that would just collect data but not be in my face for multi-day backpacking trips. What is the battery life?
Yeah, so right now we have a 24-hour battery life, and that's mainly to let us do, 24-hour races, but also to let us do Ironman's 17-hour time limit with a really comfortable elbow room on the battery life. So we've done that. We can set some of the settings down to try to stretch that battery life. We had some athletes run with it at the Leadville 100 trail run, which I forget, 32-hour time limit on that event. And so I think we had a setting that would get us 41 hours. So it's maybe not the best for bike packing. We'll develop that over time. But it is really good in that you don't need to navigate with it. It just records, and it's constantly transmitting your location. So that's the sort of application that we're really interested in, and we'll be looking forward to supporting.
Okay. And for the first part of the question, is it going to be generally available?
Oh yeah, we're looking at that, and so we're kind of working up to that. We've been using it internally at Quark, and so we're excited to do something with that in the future.
Okay, cool. Let me double check. So folks, definitely get your last questions in here over the next few minutes. We'll kind of go through a few more things here. So what would you say would be, from a business standpoint, the tips you would give to either sports tech startups that are just getting into it, or kind of that, like, if you can give yourself advice from years ago, like, what would you say?
Yeah, so I think one is, reduce scope. Your time and money and people, they're all constrained. And so the best thing you can do is actually build less. And like, that's the magic, is like, going back to that term, minimum viable product. What's the minimum feature set you need to be viable, to deliver something of value, to be able to clearly communicate it, have people be interested, and then deliver that. So reducing scope is always the question. And every time you get in a pinch, and and this is an ongoing process with all our design teams, you get in a pinch, and especially you get engineers together, and engineers love to solve problems, including me. And you start chasing down this rat hole, and a lot of times you have to back up and be like, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And that's actually a common thing that we think about a lot. What's the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we get there? So like that reduced scope is really a key.
Okay. So I asked Chip yesterday, I kind of said, what was one of the things that you look at either from a competitor device or an adjacent category that you looked at and said, oh, that's really awesome, I wish I did that first? And in his case, he said, for him, obviously being Wahoo Fitness and trainers, he said the Tax Neo of the road patterns being something that simulated road patterns doesn't have a lot of like training benefit per se, but it's just cool, and it obviously sells trainers. So what's kind of something that you can look at in the industry and go, I wish I did that first. Yeah,
well, actually, trainers are interesting. That was an interesting area, and I'm glad that's been pushing forward. That's kind of the main one. I always kind of had trainers on the mind, and never really started into it. If anyone remembers back to 2007 when we first announced the project, we were going to have a head unit as well as the power meter. And that we were able to drop that project because Garmin came out with the 705. So this is going way back, ancient history in power meter terms. We started the project. Ant Plus did not exist. We were funded. We were working away at both a power meter and a head unit at the same time. And then Garmin came along, announced Ant Plus and the 705. If I could go back in time, we kept our head unit project going for almost another year and a half past that point. It was deprioritized, but we kept going along at it. And that could have ended immediately. Of course, we didn't 100% trust Garmin to get to market with it. Like, we kind of knew it was safe. Looking back at us, we should have trusted Garmin way more than we trusted ourselves. Because we were in over our heads on the head unit side, but the power meter side worked out quite well.
And for folks that want to see what that head unit looked like, some of the first prototypes, I believe there's pictures in my Quarq behind the scenes post in terms of just what that looked like. It's like
it was huge.
Yeah,
and it's amazing too because that came out before the iPhone.
Yeah.
And so like the references that we have for consumer electronics were all different at that point. And it looked it was big, but it looked kind of cool. And then immediately when the iPhone came out, that was actually one of the things that also helped us kill that project. Because you looked at the iPhone and you're like, whoa, like the bar just moved, you know, a long ways.
Jim and I were actually just partially laughing there because a woman just walked literally as close to walking in front of the camera in this whole thing as you can possibly get, like right off my handlebars there. If the camera wasn't zoomed anymore, you would have, and completely oblivious. And she's gone back and forth like 4 times. So I think the next lesson, I'm learning lots of things on live streaming, and the next one is I'm going to get some tape or something to like a little square area here. So Long Tran asks, any plans to integrate collector with SRAM Hydro AC to keep track of brake pad wear?
Yeah, so there's nothing on the data side of the brakes that goes into collector currently, unless you guys back the Kickstarter project to do brake rotors. But in ETAP, the ETAP has an AMP Plus signal, and collector does record all your gearing information. So you can do power, heart rate, as well as all the gear selection stuff, and that's in collector today.
Okay. So I think, short of any more questions, one thing I kind of curious your thoughts on is getting swallowed by SRAM. So obviously, SRAM is a pretty darn big bike company in that, or bike company in the bike manufacturing world, or bike parts world, I guess you could say. What was that like from a startup standpoint? Like, what was kind of the process to get to that point? And then you signed it, and you're like, oh wow, did I just do the right thing?
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing because I lived through the experience of my dad starting a company. We talked about inventions outside of cycling. I have a couple patents on measuring dental vacuum system flow rate. So you like stick the toes around. Like I've got a couple patents around a device to measure that flow rate. Anyway, that was with my dad's company because he was a dentist and started a dental vacuum company to build dental vacuum pumps. And he sold that to another company, and that was adventuresome. Like his attitude towards product development and what running a company was about wasn't meshing really well with the parent company, and of course that happens a lot. And so with SRAM, we had a relationship with SRAM prior to the acquisition. We sold products to them. They were a customer of ours. We started to know some people there. I felt really comfortable with it, but when we signed, I was ready for about anything, and it's been truly amazing. And I think we can't, we could claim skill. It'd be wrong. It's luck. But it really turns out SRAM is like a bigger version of Quark. It's what Quark would have developed into. Assuming that we would have developed to the size of SRAM, we really get along very well, and it's pretty amazing. Great bunch of people. We don't agree all the time. We talk a lot about tensioning the spokes. And that's a really good analogy that we talk about a lot. Is that you have a team and everyone needs to voice their opinion, and just like a wheel, all those spokes need to be at tension, otherwise the wheel is weak, and if there's over tension, the wheel is also weak. And so everyone wants to tension the spokes, pull in separate directions to find the best solutions, and that's what we do. So we've been actually quite lucky, and SRAM's a great place.
Was that a case where you guys were looking for a buyer at the time, or the opportunity just sort of came along?
The opportunity came along. We were always thinking about acquisitions and things. If it would have worked out to operate an independent company for a long period of time, I was certainly interested in that. Really what I want to be able to do is get up in the morning and build great stuff. And Quark was kind of my ability to do that. And in the sale to SRAM, crossing our fingers that we'd have more of an ability to do that with all the additional, not just the additional resources, but the additional product lines and the additional opportunities. And that's really worked out because at the end of the day, power measurement is a integrated part of the drivetrain. And so it was very natural for us to pair up with some sort of drivetrain manufacturer. And now we're able to go to the next step where it's not just power meters in the drivetrain, it's also shifting it's also suspension performance, and if you guys all support, maybe brakes.
So what's your next race? Think you got something coming up this weekend?
Yeah, so this weekend I'm doing the Dakota 5.0. It's our 50-mile mountain bike race in Spearfish, South Dakota. And looking forward to that.
And so just to clarify for folks, today is Thursday evening. It's 7 p.m.
Yes.
And your race is what time and where? And we're in Europe.
And we're in southern Germany. And
Yep.
so my plan, this is welcome to my life, we're going to drive to Munich. I've got my ride who's probably wondering where the heck I'm at right now. And so we're going to go to the hotel, throw the stuff in. We're going to drive to Munich. We're going to fly back home. It's going to stop in Chicago. I'm going to talk to customs in Chicago and try to find a bag from Norseman that disappeared somewhere between Norway and who knows. So I'm going to spend 4 hours in Chicago hunting that down. And then I'll be back in South Dakota. And then Saturday, I actually it's not too bad. I have a full day on Saturday to recover, and then the race is Sunday morning.
That sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot.
It sounds like Sunday should be fun.
Yeah, given your typical schedule, I won't compare. So.
Well, thanks everyone for watching, and of course thanks to Jim for coming on and agreeing to do this. I think today went a little bit better than yesterday in terms of the technical side, in terms of just making this all work. I think we'll do the same thing at Interbike again in about 2.5 weeks. I believe the internet should be a whole lot better there because, quite frankly, Vegas is way more Wi-Fi equipped than the middle of the woods right now that we're in. But if you got ideas for companies or people you want me to talk to for a kind of a DCR live series during that time period, go and drop them in the comments down below. You should have a few minutes to be able to do that before I think the thingy automatically closes, but definitely you can give it there or on the page where I announced this on DCRainmaker.com. You'll see that kind of the DCR live series page there as one of the blog posts. Just click blog at the top and go and drop the comments there on ideas. And then finally, if you made it this far in the live broadcast, then you've probably been watching the entire time. But if you just joined a few minutes ago and want to go back to the beginning, you can do that. And then I'll also put up, Wi-Fi permitting, in the next few days, the full HD recording of this with all the nice sound quality. So if you want to kind of save yourself some potential pain, you can watch it then. So with that, thanks for watching.